The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. This is Gone By Lunchtime. We have a new government edition. Hello, Ben Thomas.
Hello, Toby.
Ben Thomas, you have you're at the moment nibbling on is that a calypso ice lolly thing? What is that?
It is. I guess popsicles don't have a high enough profit margin to sell at corner dairies.
You have a very good reason
anymore
for this, however, in that yesterday you were in surgery.
I was. I've been wheeled out of surgery for the pod after having my apparently enormous tonsils removed. My grade 3 big boys are no longer on board there.
Your big adult tonsils.
My large adenoid sons.
Yes. Annabelle Lee, hello.
Hi.
It's nice to see you here. And we have another guest as well, who is making her podcasting debut at an age of...
3 weeks old.
3 weeks?
Waimahia Rose.
Waimahia Rose is sitting on your lap, a pudding of a human being, really. And put her up to the mic, see if she's going to...
Let's see if we can get some cuteness out of her.
Did you wake her up, I think?
She's grabbing the mic. That's pretty good. Oh, what end was that?
That was the top end. You'll hear from the other end shortly.
Oh, yeah. What happened? Yesterday, Winston Peters appeared after a day of waiting of Vietnamese soups for his breakfast lunch, of press gallery journalists continuing their slightly strange, tortuous...
Their limbo-like existence. Suspended in the lobbies of Parliament and Bowen House.
The semiotics of neckties. And Winston Peters finally emerged, and he had indeed made a decision. He hadn't told anyone. The decision was it's going to be Labour.
It's a girl.
It's a girl. It's a queen. And the deal in summary is a Labour New Zealand First coalition with the Green Party offering confidence and supply.
And hash cookies.
And confidence and supply.
Only in the future.
And a referendum on hash cookies.
Referendum on hash
as part
cookies.
of the arrangement, I believe. And can we just quickly, before we get into this, various people have demanded, despite the fact that Madeline Chapman did a perfectly satisfactory post on the spinoff.co.nz explaining confidence and supply using the metaphor of fuck buddies. Ben, what is the difference between being in coalition proper and being what is called a confidence and supply agreement?
So under MMP, the first 2 governments that we had under MMP were coalition governments. In 1996, Winston Peters formed the first coalition government with the national government. What that means is that the 2 parties both have ministers inside cabinet, and the 2 parties together are the government. And so cabinet collective responsibility applies to both of those parties. right now, when you have, if you're a member of the National Party and the National Party has a policy on something, and if the government has a policy on something under a national government, national MPs will have to accord with that policy and abide by that policy and promote it as their own. They have to vote for those policies.
They can't express a difference of opinion.
They can't express a difference of opinion. If you're part of that government through a coalition, that means that the minor party and its MPs also have to vote for everything that the government is doing, right? When you have a confidence and supply arrangement, and that was the arrangement that all of the support parties had with governments from 2005 onwards. Mm-hmm. Winston Peters also innovated that system
with Labour.
That's when the governing party can put forward its proposals for legislation, and in the ministerial positions where this confidence and supply party supplies ministers, they are bound by the government's position, because that's also their position as the minister. But the party doesn't have to vote for government initiatives in other respects, except for the budget and for motions of confidence.
And those ministers outside Cabinet will attend Cabinet when matters pertaining to their portfolio are under discussion, but otherwise they won't. Is that right?
Yeah, which is the normal situation for ministers outside of Cabinet.
So if I may translate that into millennial speak, it's like being polyamorous and you're Labour and New Zealand First are the couple, but Labour's allowed to see the Greens on the side so long as it doesn't clash with their date night with New Zealand First.
Yes. New Zealand First, as part of their arrangement, get 4 cabinet ministers.
4 cabinet ministers and 1 parliamentary undersecretary.
Yes, that's like a little we'll chuck in a parliamentary undersecretary, darling, just to sweeten the deal. And the Greens have 3 ministers outside cabinet and also parliamentary
and 1 parliamentary undersecretary. So it was there have tended to be parliamentary undersecretaries, which is this sort of, you're still a backbencher, but and you're not a minister, you don't get all of the kind of perks. Well, actually, the irony is you do get a lot of the perks ministers do. You don't get paid as much, and you don't have a ministry that reports to you. But your job is that you're meant to assist the minister in their role. So David Seymour for ACT was a parliamentary undersecretary.
Yes.
And that was seen as another way, for the national government and ACT to stay as sort of separately delineated parties, because he was clearly not part of cabinet or even a minister. I'm not sure how well it worked out. I think
I don't think the public generally.
I don't think much of a distinction is made
between. I mean, the Māori Party, didn't they? Annabelle were seen as propping up the national government, which they were. Whether they were in formal coalition, confidence supply, whatever, did it matter?
It probably didn't help that they kept saying that they were at the table too, which didn't help people to differentiate between being in a full coalition and just confidence and supply. It strikes me as being a very elegant solution for the Greens, and I think it goes to show that Jacinda has gone out of her way to honour that memorandum of understanding that Labour had with the Greens prior to the election, and I think Green voters will have a lot to feel pleased about in their supporters. And it strikes me as being quite a fair deal, considering that New Zealand First have always made a big fuss about not ever going into government with the Greens. It seems a very elegant solution, I thought. It
looks that way, and we haven't seen the actual brass tacks of it yet, have we?
No.
But it was interesting, I thought, that how the Greens just didn't really figure. James Shaw, the remaining co-leader, pretty well kept his head down. You didn't hear much about negotiations going on. There was no one staking those out, as far as we could tell. And the memorandum of understanding that you mentioned had been getting a lot of shit poured on it as being a waste of space, as not being worth the paper it's written on, blah blah blah. But as it turned out, even though the Greens had that calamitous period, in the end that kind of underpinned. Without that, it may have been a lot harder for New Zealand First to go into a negotiation with Labour without getting the feeling as though it was a shambolic collection of parties, that rowing boat thing.
And I think for the Greens, it's a win-win for them, because if things turn sour, they can say that they were, they weren't in cabinet. They were merely supplying confidence in supply, and they get to keep their brand slightly separate. If they get good wins, then they can claim credit for those as well. So it seems like a good long-term solution for them, and it finally puts to bed a lot of the criticism that we've heard about the Greens over the last few months, that, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. They've never, had a ministerial portfolio. So I think it sort of takes care of a swathe of issues for them.
In effect, they're in government, though, aren't they? I mean, it's one of those things
course
where you can the semantics of it are such that they can describe themselves, as you say. But if they got 3 ministers and they four square behind the Labour Party, they're in, right? I mean, it's sort of, is it a minority government or a majority?
In 2005,
it's kind of a majority government.
In 2005, when Winston Peters and Helen Clark pioneered this ministers outside government idea, which is exactly what is happening here with the Greens, academics and constitutional experts said, it's impossible. It's a logical impossibility. And yet that's been the form of support that parties have offered governments for the past 12 years without any problems.
Yeah.
So, it is a neat solution, but it may, as Annabelle was talking about earlier with the Māori Party, it may not be the solution that, that the Greens are hoping for in terms of keeping them sort of adequately differentiated from Labour. In the sense that Winston started off with a coalition government in 1996, then he came up with this idea of ministers outside of government in 2005, to keep that separation. But, that didn't really work out, and he seems to have returned to this coalition, this coalition idea of actually being fully embedded in the government. Yeah. And I think that is interesting.
I can't help but think how bittersweet this must be for Metidia.
Yeah.
All those years that she was in Parliament, and, it was expected that if Labour and the Greens did well, that she, would get a ministerial portfolio. So, I have no doubt that she's rapt that the Greens are finally going to get into that position. It must be, bittersweet for her knowing that she's missing out. It's a shame.
It really is, and because but at the same time, as has been pointed out, she was the wings of the butterfly that caused the rise of Jacinda, and so you look at the concessions that the Greens have got that they sent out to their delegates. There's a lot in there that Metiria Ture would be very proud of, and so not to be all martyrly about it, but she really has a legacy there, no?
Yes, I agree. We're all looking at Ben. Even my Mahia is looking at Ben.
Is that sort of like the guy who assassinated Archduke Ferdinand has a legacy? I mean,
I see what
in
you mean.
the sense that you couldn't say that this was what Metidia was trying to do at the outset.
Except that she did the question of putting certain issues onto the table, whatever the aforementioned table of bringing.
Yeah, I'm not convinced by that. I think Jacinda Ardern was talking about child poverty, for her entire 9 years in Parliament. I don't think that it took Metidia's sort of stunt to get that on the agenda of a Labour government. I think that Jacinda Ardern had always said she would want to be the Minister of Children in a Labour government. So I don't think that this was something that was suddenly discovered at the Greens campaign launch this year.
Such a haterade.
I mean, it's a bit like saying that Don Brash's legacy is letting John Key become Prime Minister.
Right.
Wow.
Amazing.
Comparing Metidia to Don Brash.
In a structural sense. in the kind of framework we're talking about, in terms of sort of the failure of her political career, I don't think you wouldn't. Do you give her credit for that?
Well, I suppose that what she was doing was throwing everything in for some policy gains that she felt really powerfully about, and whether or not they were directly consequential, the the fact that the Greens have ended up in government, which includes things like having done the MOU, includes having done all that policy work, that is surely part of her legacy, and there is something...
Even
as
getting
Annabelle
Bill
says,
English to commit to lifting more children out of poverty,
Yeah.
It did become a bit of an election issue, not as big an issue as what it should have, but I think it definitely started the conversation.
I mean, you could accept, no, that at very least, as Annabelle said, it must be bittersweet for Metiria Ture to see the Greens now, in effect, part of government, which is what she'd wanted to do for so long, but not to be part of that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
of course. Yeah.
We're in agreement. Winston got up in the Beehive Theatre last night and spoke, and he started talking about capitalism and the ugly face of capitalism and blah, blah, blah. It seemed very clear that he was heading in the direction of Labour and the Greens, and it was as if maybe that was the plan all along, maybe. But depending on which reports you read, it was 15 minutes beforehand that he made that decision. I think, in fact, that's what he said. Is that true? Do we buy that? That it was really came that far down to the wire, or was it always leaning that way?
If it is true, then he must be like a remarkable speed typer, because to bash out that speech in less than 15 minutes is pretty amazing.
Well,
I
except he could have
suspect
just
that he
insert party here.
I suspect he had a natural leaning towards Labour all along, and that there was a genuine negotiation about what was on offer, but I think his natural leanings were towards Labour because there's just more alignment in their policies.
Yeah, you took part, Ben, in the Spin-Offs collection of people making predictions. What was it? Were you one of those people who went 50.1%?
I said 51% national because at that point there were some circumstances under which
So
Labour couldn't form a government.
You got it wrong.
I think when Labour picked up the specials and Labour and the Greens picked up the specials, then it became 50-50.
Did you do that before the specials?
That was before the specials.
Oh, okay. So you were just wrong earlier.
I was wrong earlier.
Yeah.
Can I say that I was right?
Did you? Were you in that?
I picked Jacinda, didn't I, last time we were here?
Okay, you weren't in that
yep.
roundup though, were you? You were probably you picked Jacinda. You did. That's true.
The thing is, it was a complete line call, right?
You genuinely think it was a line call through all those negotiations?
I think for the party, because remember this took place in a number of stages. It wasn't just sort of Winston Peters sitting at his desk ruminating. He has got a caucus that is a much more, I guess the word would be a legitimate caucus than New Zealand First has had in the past. Well, no, I mean, these were decisions that these were discussions that involved other people, which is not sort of generally how you think of New Zealand First. You sort of think of it as a kind of shell organisation for Winston Peters. But this time, they do actually have, much more assertive, I think, people in their caucus like Tracy Martin, Ron Mark, Shane Jones, people who were expecting ministerial posts, who have an idea of what they want to be doing in government. They're not just there making up the numbers for Peters as some of his caucuses have been in the past.
Yes.
So I think after those initial discussions with his caucus, it probably wasn't clear where they would go. Then they brought in the board, the mysterious board.
The board who hath no name.
They found these board members, whether sort of searching them out in ancient caves sort of around the country or signing them up at RSA's the previous night. I'm not sure how they all kind of came together in Wellington, but they eventually did. And I don't know if you saw Winston's stand-up afterwards. He looked shattered.
When?
This was after the board discussion, which went all day.
Oh, right. He looked sort of cadaverous.
Yeah, he looked very exasperated, and I think that
He'd be very upset that you said that, I imagine.
I mean, he's a handsome man, and he looked like he looked a bit shaken, and I don't think that this was a clear path, and I don't think it was just Winston Peters being indecisive. I think that there were genuine clashes within New Zealand First. There were genuine differences of opinion about which party they should go with. You look at a guy like Shane Jones, he would clearly have been tending towards national.
Interesting.
If you look at someone like Tracy Martin, at the beginning would have clearly been tending towards Labour.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there were issues to deal with. I mean, all of those factors that we thought of immediately after the election still hold true, which is, National will be a huge opposition, which will be quite difficult, and would have only been one party to deal with in government, versus, having a new government with Labour and the Greens, and the advantages that has over a sort of legacy government that's already been in for 3 terms.
I think you're right, Ben, and it's not, but it's not that his MPs are hand puppets, but he is a leader in a very kind of old school Māori sense. He is the chief of the New Zealand First Tribe, and it's not a one-man band, but ultimately at the end of the day, I would imagine that what Winston says goes.
And of the process itself, there was a lot of complaints. 7% of the vote, 100% of the power, which is nonsense. This is taking forever, which is nonsense. I mean, Winston Peters did 2 dumb things. One was pretending that the deadline he'd set he hadn't done, which he had, and he could have said clearly things have moved, and now I need to push that out a bit. Let's be grown up about it. And then he did that extraordinary press conference where he berated the press and kind of fired off all these. So those were dumb things, but otherwise seems to be fairly responsibly done. I don't get
but
it.
that's it's a shame because he created a rod for his own back, setting such a short deadline, and it. In the end, the media were growing frustrated, and rightly so, because he was adamant throughout the election campaign that it would be all done and dusted by the Thursday, and he set himself an impossible target, and he couldn't deliver, and rightly so. It's an incredibly complicated, complex type of negotiations. So I have little sympathy for him in that regard, because he set up that expectation, and it was incredibly frustrating for the media, and I understand why. How many reporters must have had like aneurysms and heart attacks and stomach ulcers developing yesterday? It would be, myself included. The amount of times I checked my phone yesterday was crazy.
But he was right too, wasn't he? I mean, he probably should have anticipated this earlier when he set that Writ Day related deadline, that the specials were crucial because, as you said before, when we were talking about how you got it wrong in your prediction, Ben, the shifting of those votes and specials were absolutely crucial. If they hadn't moved, then he would have had almost no choice but to go with National.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think there was anything wrong with the delay, the supposed delay. I mean, what is it? In the end, it took 3.5 weeks after the election to form a government. Under the National government, it was pretty easy, right?
But that's the thing, though, Ben. You're right. Like it wasn't unreasonable to take 3.5 weeks. But when you've repeatedly told the media and the New Zealand public that it would be done by the following Thursday, and then you don't, then it does become an issue. So why they made that commitment in the first place, I don't understand.
I'm a huge fan of New Zealand political reporting. I think that our gallery do a fantastic job.
He's about to say something mean about New Zealand political reporting.
And get a lot of unfair criticism from armchair critics, on Twitter and on the internet.
Twitter.
Bastards.
Toxic.
But what I think, one blind spot I think that our political media have, and our media in general, is that they vastly overestimate how much the public in general care about whether there's a government this week or next week. I don't see it in sort of day-to-day life, except that it gives people something to talk about. Most people are not. I'm desperate to know the name of the new Minister of Commerce so that I can write to them with my concerns about, regulatory reform. It just doesn't impact on people in that way. And I think this idea that the difference between sort of 3 weeks or 4 weeks is a little overstated.
The truth is, it was kind of cool not having a government. It was like, when you're a teenager and your parents leave you at the house for the first time when they go away for the weekend.
It doesn't mean you can do shoplifting, Annabelle.
No, not shoplifting, but you can have a party and have your friends over to get drunk and clean up the next day, and everything's fine. Like, you can be trusted to have a little bit of a knees up and not wreck the country, and that's what we did, and I quite liked it.
That's an important point for the 1,000 or so people who work in Parliament, which is during that caretaker period, you're actually constitutionally forbidden from doing any work.
Right.
Which is like, that is a chill time.
Yeah.
I did one between elections still.
Yeah.
And it's great. But yeah, you're right. When Winston introduces that level of uncertainty where he could be making the decision tomorrow, it becomes very difficult to plan going out and getting drunk.
Yeah.
Because you need to be on top of your game the next day. So I think in that respect, certainty is very important
And
for our hardworking
exactly.
public servants.
And I have to say, a nightmare, and as a producer, in terms of trying to get panels up for the, for the weekend, and you're like, do I need one on the government or what? And then it was a little bit painful.
The struggle is real.
It is.
We've got this far without touching very much on the Prime Minister-elect, or the Prime Minister presumptive, or whatever we call her. Jacinda Ardern is going to be the Prime Minister. That's amazing.
It is amazing.
It's amazing, and it's going to be a hell of a task, isn't it?
It's a big task, all right, yeah. But, I think she's really proven herself over the last couple of months. She's smart. She's got great emotional intelligence. I think she'll manage.
Amazing stamina as well. I mean, that campaign is...
stamina.
I went for one day and I was fucking exhausted.
Yeah.
I was just watching.
Yeah.
And look, something that people forget is that there isn't a lot of experience in Labour from the, Prime Minister-elect down. But our system is actually set
Ministerial
up
experience.
Ministerial experience.
Yeah.
But our system is set up to accommodate that. This is the whole point of having a permanent civil permanent public service, having a Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. You really can just go down and slot in. Obviously, your personal attributes are very important, how you perform in the role. But when people bring up she's 37, she hasn't been a minister before, none of that's really relevant. It really just comes down to, do you have leadership characteristics? She does. Can you bring people together? Can you lead your government? And, I don't think Jacinda will have any problems in that respect.
And she's got some good people around her too to give her, to mentor her and guide her, like Annie King. And even having Winston, I think, will be good for her as well. Someone old and savvy and, experienced. I think that's not a bad thing at all for her to be in coalition with someone like Winston, and he clearly likes her and he backs her, and he said so yesterday. So I think it could well be the making of her.
Well, the other thing is, I think we saw in the campaign, the more people saw Jacinda, the more they liked her. And I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a more likeable person in New Zealand in general, quite aside from politics, than Jacinda Ardern.
Yeah.
So I don't think she'll have any problems. People talk about the legitimacy issue in terms of the second largest party leading the government. And, remember in the last polls before the election, Bill English was the preferred Prime Minister, but I think we'll see that swap around quite quickly.
I think too, the risk has been overstated, and we've had the whole, three-headed monster line rolled out. But, I mean, their governance arrangement was a four-headed monster, one that wore a bow tie.
One a really, really big head and a lot of little tiddly-biddly heads.
That's right. But I think, the Greens seem to be an incredibly sensible, pragmatic party. I don't think they're going to want to do anything to rock the waka.
Really?
Yes, I think so. Well, they're very ideologically driven, and
quite principled.
They're very principled, and Winston isn't going to want this coalition to come undone on his watch, particularly if it is his last dance, which we understand it is. So I think all three parties will be working really hard to keep it together. So I think perhaps the risks have been overstated, and it's still going to be challenging, but I think she's probably up to the task as much as anyone.
Battles within the New Zealand First caucus over succession, a couple of backbench New Zealand First MPs whose names we've never heard, who go a bit AWOL. Greens so principled they cannot afford themselves the pragmatism of voting on issues they don't approve of.
I don't know about that. I mean, one of the concerns coming in for Labour was that they actually didn't have enough talent to really create a very compelling cabinet. I think to a large extent that's probably still the case, because they did a lot of their recruitment before Jacinda Ardern became the leader and before they went up in the polls, and that attracts the sort of that affects the sort of people you can attract onto your list. So the Greens and New Zealand First MPs won't just be making up numbers. I mean, if the Green ministers, I assume there'll be James Shaw, Julianne Genter, and either Marama Davidson or Eugenie Sage. Those are very capable people who will make very good ministers and could easily slot into a cabinet place if they needed to, and could handle major portfolios. New Zealand First, Shane Jones, he's had his issues in the past, but he's a very smart guy and a very capable politician. Ron Mark is a capable politician. Tracy Martin is a very, very good operator. And so these won't be sort of weak links or making up the numbers. These will be people who actually play a full part in government.
I'm mostly excited about Trevor Mallard as Speaker.
My God.
45-minute long treatises on the historical revisions of standing orders.
The redemption of Mallard.
Amazing.
Mallard was a really good minister under the Labour government, and he is somebody who took opposition very hard, and it wasn't good for him, and he just became a bit of a crank on Twitter, I think. But now he's having the opportunity to sort of redeem himself and. Do you
think he'll bring it instead of points of order, there'll be like arm wrestles and? He's
a very good assistant speaker. He
has been. And he knows it inside out, right? Yeah. He knows the rules inside out.
There's this incredible disjunct between sort of how Mallard conducts himself generally in the House and when he's in the Speaker's chair. Yeah. And he'll be very good in that role. I'd say probably better than David Carter was.
And you touched on it earlier, Ben Thomas, this question of the size of the opposition. People saying we're a formidable opposition. How many seats are 56?
56 for National.
A 56-seat opposition, single-party opposition. With what's the guy that's got the one party?
And David Seymour.
And this wall of sound, right? I mean, they've got some issues, and we'll come to that in a second. But how much of a challenge is it going to be to try and command with that opposition coming at you all the time?
So it presents a challenge for Labour in the sense that they have to keep three parties together just to be as big as their opposition party, right? And there are all sorts of arcane procedural things that affect the way you can get legislation through in the House that are affected by that. Things like the Business Committee where all the parties basically have to agree on something. So National only has to turn up, whereas Labour has to sort of muster all of its partners to be, on the right page. It also affects things like questions in the House, where the number of non-ministerial MPs is what dictates how many questions you get to ask. So because National was so much bigger than Labour in the previous terms, National actually got as many opportunities to ask what they call patsy questions, or just opportunities for ministers to talk about how great they are, as Labour did to actually hold the government to account. Now National will actually have, 3/4 of the questions every question.
Really.
Which is fine. And in theory, they should be able to coordinate those better to put more pressure on Labour. In order to take it, and also National will have more people on select committees, which means that they have a better chance to shape legislation before it goes back to the House and change government legislation. So there is a big opportunity for National. Doesn't mean that they'll take it. They'll need to sort of really focus on their House management, and Labour will have Chris Hipkins probably as their leader of the House, and he's a very canny guy who's got a lot of experience in that, piloting through legislation. So that is the major challenge. But I think this monster opposition has been a bit overstated, in the sense that as large as you are as an opposition party, your resources are nowhere near that of a government. If they have a large leader's office of about 30 people, that's only as big as the Prime Minister's office, and that's basically all of their political staff. So they lose all of their ministerial press secretaries, all of their ministerial advisors, and that's dozens and dozens and dozens of people. There is no comparison between the resourcing for opposition and the resourcing for government. So I don't think it will be as much of a challenge as some people are painting it.
I'm interested to see too, will there be a mass exodus from National? Sitting on the opposition benches, I don't imagine will be particularly appealing for a number of them. So will we see an exodus of the old guard and then a whole lot of sort of newbie MPs come in who, aren't great at debating and asking questions and that sort of thing?
Well,
that may water down how ferocious this the opposition is.
I think that's a really important point, because some people have said, well, there'll be all these former ministers who will be able to really rake the new government over the coals. Well, actually, if you look at the cabinet over the last 3 years, you don't see a lot of people who were really on top of their portfolios. You actually see a lot of people who were very dependent on their staff and their officials in their departments. And once they're stripped of that, I can't see any way that Jonathan Coleman is going to be able to hold the new Minister of Health to account on anything. He inherited a portfolio that was completely trouble-free and turned it into a basket case.
Yeah.
He'll be the leader.
Yeah.
He won't have to do that. He'll be leading, surely, the National Party.
But what I'm, I think it's very...
Coleman, Nick Smith, maybe Jerry Brownlee even. Those guys all hold seats, though, don't they? So they're not...
That's right.
Whereas
They won't be
Bishop
going
is on
anywhere.
the list. It does create... It's not as easy as just going,
And look, I think...
see you guys, someone else slots in.
And I think a guy like Coleman would probably be appalled to hear you referring to him as the old guard. I think last...
You did that. You were the one who referred to him as the old guard.
I was referring to him as a former minister, but I mean...
I referred to him as the future leader of the National Party. Sorry,
I think there will be some departures. David Carter will leave.
Yeah.
There's some people, and English is one of them, who might feel that they've done all they need to for the country. My old boss, Chris Finlayson, I don't think he's got anything more to prove in the treaty settlement space.
Yeah.
He's a list MP.
Yep.
Maybe he'll go.
Yep.
Do you think he'll be...
for example...
With Brownlee as another guy, I think Brownlee has really made a pretty huge contribution to the country. On the other hand, like you said, he holds an electorate seat, so it makes it a bit more difficult for him to retire.
But there's definitely a way of doing some rejuvenation while having this huge wedge in the House, huge chunk of the House, and to bring in a new group of people without sort of having to mix around much with your shadow cabinet. Sorry, Annabelle, you can say something.
Ben, I'm just curious. Will Finlayson be because he was such an effective treaty settlement minister, do you think he'll be disappointed that he wasn't able to get Ngāpuhi over the line before they got kicked out of government?
Well, I assume that he would. I mean, he takes all of every settlement very seriously, and obviously Ngāpuhi is the last really big one, I think. But I think what's important in the treaty settlement space is that it's in a different kind of place to where this national government inherited it in 2008, where really Doug Graham kicked off the process in the 90s. Then Labour came into power and just sort of stalled the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it really just kind of sat at sea for a long time. Michael Cullen came in and really jump-started it, but there wasn't a lot of... it wasn't very systematic. It was very ad hoc. So there were a lot of balls in the air, but it wasn't being done in a sort of very effective way. And whereas now, there is actually a program with its own momentum. So I think that whoever inherits that portfolio won't have to do anywhere near the amount of work to kind of keep the process going. As we sort of, it's nowhere near the end, but it's probably in the last sort of, third or quarter of the entire process.
What does it look like with the Labour, New Zealand First, Green Party more generally for Te Ao Māori and
Well, one of the things
one
of the interesting things that's come out of this is the criticism was made by the Māori Party and their supporters, after the election, that Māori hadn't voted strategically, and that Labour's Māori MPs were going to be impotent, sitting on the opposition benches, not achieving anything, and that Māori had lost their voice within government. And I think what Peters' decision shows is that actually every single one of those Māori seats were absolutely crucial in Labour's ability to form a government with New Zealand First. You know, they picked up 2 votes in the special, 2 seats in the specials. If they hadn't have picked up Waiariki, if they had lost Te Tau Hauauru to the Māori Party, then their ability to form a government would have been negligible. So actually what it shows is that Māori did vote strategically. They voted the National Party out. They voted the Māori Party out to ensure that National didn't have the ability, any potential coalition partners to form a government with. I think the Māori Party failed to convey clearly to Māori voters that they were willing to form a government with Labour. They say that they did, but they didn't. And when you go back and you listen to some of the interviews, it was clear that certainly Te Ururoa's preference was to get back in bed with National, and that wasn't acceptable to Māori. Kelvin Davis and them took a huge risk pulling themselves off the list, and I do think that had Andrew Little remained as leader, those Māori seats wouldn't have gone back to Labour. I think, potentially Te Tai Tokiro could have gone to Hone, but I think certainly Waiariki
he could have been a parliamentary undersecretary.
I think Waiariki would have gone back to Te Ururoa, but Stardust, the Stardust did a lot. I think it'll be really interesting to see what plays out over the next term in terms of Te Mātāwai, the Māori Language Board, which is basically one board to rule them all. They get to appoint board members to the board of Māori Television, to Te Taura Whiri, to Te Māngai Pāho. It'll be interesting to see what, if any, changes happens there, what will happen with Te Tumu Pairoa, the Māori trustee, what will happen to the Māori Land Service, what will happen to Māori Television and Māori broadcasting, what changes we see, who becomes a Minister of Māori Affairs.
I was just going to
What will happen to whānau ora? I mean,
what will happen?
Labour is in a coalition with a party that is determinedly against whānau ora, is determined against any race-based policy.
Yeah, will there still be a Minister for whānau ora? I can't imagine that there will be. So
I think you'd have a separate one.
It'll be interesting to see what happens there.
I mean, the seats are safe, right? So that's already come out that
the seats are safe. That was one of the first things he did immediately after the election, was give the interview to the Australian journalist saying
that was less of a
which is part of the reason too why I think that it was quite clear from the outset that his preference was to get in bed with Labour.
Who do you think will be the Minister of Māori Affairs and also Minister of Treaty Settlements? It's not clear to me. I would have thought Kelvin Davis would be Minister of Māori Affairs.
I would have thought so too. There's rumours circulating that Kelvin doesn't necessarily want Māori Affairs and wants corrections. I would have thought if not Kelvin, perhaps Nanaya.
Yeah.
Obviously Nanaya can't do. Good question.
What did you say?
Where do you think Willie Jackson fits?
Well, he's invested in whānau ora, so I would imagine that he will be doing whatever he can to protect the interests of whānau ora.
And the other thing is Kelvin Davis may or may not be busy as Deputy Prime Minister. We don't know yet.
Yeah, but Winston's going to take it.
Of course, Winston's going to take it.
He's just going to think about it for a minute.
I don't think he necessarily will. I really don't. No, right. I think that he would probably be happy with something like regional development or
he could have both though, because
rail or
Deputy Prime Minister isn't really a job, is it? It's more
Well, I don't think I think it's probably a good thing for Jacinda if he does act as Deputy Prime Minister. I'm not sure that Kelvin is, deeply invested in getting that role either. So I really think that, it's all up in the air at the moment.
As we speak, Labour are meeting in caucus to vote for who will be their cabinet ministers, the people who will fill those roles. So we'll you may know by the time you listen to this whether Willie Jackson is among them, whether there are any other new faces. I mean, someone like Kiri Allen, who was first-term MP but has been doing a candidate diary for us, is a clear star, and maybe inside cabinet would be a reach too far. But there are a few people like that on the emerging new people who could end up outside cabinet with sort of associate roles, maybe.
I hope so. It would be nice to see some of those fresh faces, but people who are, very skilled and knowledgeable in their different areas of expertise get some sort of influence over what happens in those portfolios.
I would have thought that of the newcomers, probably Greg O'Connor is the best bet for a cabinet place, either in police or...
He said he doesn't want police though, eh?
Yeah, I mean, Nathan Guy never wanted MPI because he didn't want to be typecast as a farmer, but, you know...
You could imagine O'Connor being given something like ACC.
You take
though,
what you get, you know.
Let's wind this up, but before we do, we haven't talked about Bill English, who led what everyone thinks was a very strong campaign, outperformed expectations, got up again, and did well, and gave last night a very gracious and impressive concession speech. Does he stay as leader or does he go? What do you reckon?
What are his options? Like, I don't know. He's been in Parliament such a long time. What would he?
He's still only 55, isn't he? Something like that.
Oh, look, he's got time for a whole new career after Parliament. You know, you could easily imagine him on sort of some position in the World Bank or the IMF. Or if he wanted to do the kind of John Key thing and go onto these corporate boards, Jenny Shipley.
Would the World Bank want him if he has miscalculates an $11 billion hole? He's kind of done his credibility some damage there. He might need to do some extra maths tuition.
Remedial courses.
Yeah.
But surely there must be. I mean, I think he could probably hold on if he wanted to. You know, although there will obviously be people who will be keen to.
Nobody could challenge him within that party. But he got 44%. He was the preferred prime minister the week of the election.
Yes.
There is, you couldn't topple him and replace him with someone like Jonathan Coleman, who the public has never heard of.
But there could be there's an argument that
and who's clearly so inept.
There's an argument that if you do it, you do it now. Right?
I actually think that's wrong and we saw that with Phil Goff.
You think the trick is to do it 2 months out as Jacinda Ardern? Well, just wait till and then just keep it a secret.
Yeah, I mean,
Nikki Kay, it's going to be you, but not until 80 days out.
You absolutely don't do it immediately because all of the focus and all of the oxygen and all of the attention is going to be on our new, fresh, exciting Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. That no one's going to get any kind of look in for media attention or public interest while in the first year that Jacinda is Prime Minister. I mean, being a first-term government is fun. I came into the national government, to work for them in their first term. And, even the contrast between the first term and the second term is huge. Anytime there's a problem, you can fix it by saying, I can't believe the previous government let it get to this state, we are going to fix it.
9 long years.
And people are satisfied with that as an answer for at least another 3 years before they check in again and suddenly become less satisfied with your progress.
I'm really, in that regard, I'm really interested to see what sort of access the media are going to have to ministers, because my personal experience has been over the last 9 years that it's incredibly difficult to get a national minister to front on anything, and Paula Bennett being the prime example. She turned us down for something like 28 weeks in a row for an interview and still to this day refuses to come on the program, which makes it really hard to do your job adequately as a journalist. And in terms of the OIA, the Official Information Act, and the way National have treated it with utter disregard, it'll be interesting to see if there's a change of culture within Labour in terms of how they engage with the media, whether or not they allow themselves to be held accountable, and how they manage OIA requests.
So what there won't be a change of the general trend of the culture, but what there will be is there will be a sort of spike for that first term in terms of being friendly with journalists, in terms of making information available. We had that under National. The funny thing about the national government and its currently appalling conduct under the OIA is that the only official communication that the national government ever sent out to its staff about the OIA was, do these in a timely fashion and be helpful to requesters right at the beginning of the government. And everyone was, but then what happens is, you let things slide and you sort of realise sometimes it's a bit easier to just leave things for the full 20 days and that kind of thing. So I think we'll see the same thing again, which is that for the first 3 years in particular, ministers will be much more forthcoming with the media, much more forthcoming with information, because the media and the public are glad to hear from them. They're new and they're fresh, and it's a good time for everybody. Wellington will be sort of a buzz from now until the end of the year, and it'll culminate in a big press gallery party where everyone will sort of get drunk and all the new MPs and new staff will be down there, and it's sort of like the credits rolling in a high school movie or something. But it's an exciting time to be down in Wellington at the beginning of a new government, and there is a lot of positivity around. And in terms of things like you were talking about, like the IEA, sometimes it is actually just a good thing to get a fresh start with a government.
Ben Thomas is having a good idea. It's an exciting time. Let's say goodbye on that note. We'll catch up again soon. Thank you, Ben Thomas from Excelsior. Thank you, Annabelle Lee from the Hui.
Kia ora.
And thank you... I've forgotten.
Waimihia.
That's terrible. Waimihia Rose. Thank you, Waimihia Rose. Thank you, Madeline Chaplin.
Thanks, Madeline
Chapman.
Chapman.
Chapman. Just turn it off. Make it stop. Make it stop.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spin-Off. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, Podcast Manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.